Well, good evening, everybody. It's a nice, cool evening here in beautiful Gilbert, South Carolina. I'm out here at a different location tonight because I wanted to share something different with you. I'm standing in front of my rat shed. This is a big shed that I use for breeding my rats and for keeping various dry storage things like substrate and cleaning supplies and all that fun stuff. And I thought today I would talk about something a little different and tell you how I breed rats to save money. In fact, I have saved a lot of money over the past couple of years by breeding my own rats. If I am completely honest, I would rather not breed my own rats. It's a lot more work breeding the rats and working with the rats than it is the snakes, but it's absolutely essential. And in this video, I'm going to attempt to explain why and give you a realistic picture of what kind of money I have saved by breeding my own rats versus buying them, which I was doing when I first started. So if you've ever wondered how much money you can really save, the title might give it away a little bit, but let's break that down. So let's take a look inside and let's see what's going on. All right, so we're here in the rat shed. Let me close this door. It's a little chilly outside, so we want to keep the warmth in. And let me tell you a little bit about the journey I've taken with rats. Now, I'm going to tell you it's a little bit of chaos and a little bit of mess in here, so I hope you don't mind that. But as you can see behind me is my rat breeding operation. We just did all the cleaning yesterday, so there's still a lot of clean but empty tubs, so that's why you see some missing. But pretty much everything that's on those racks right now is full of rodents, or at least has rodents in it. So I started breeding rats in the latter part of 2021, and I actually got started with these two homemade style racks here. Now, I didn't make them. Hopefully you can see those okay. They each hold 5 of these black concrete mixing tubs, and for the last several months I haven't actually had them in use. I actually put them back into service yesterday as I cleaned because I've been growing out a bunch of female rats and I was running out of space. So let's see here. We'll kind of zoom in here. Now, you probably see a lot of folks with these kind of setups. I don't know if you can see the fuzzies in there at all, but these kind of setups work great when you're starting out. And I was fortunate that when I started out, I actually knew, I was like, man, I really need to start breeding my own rats. So when we moved out here, we had sold our house, and I used some of that equity from my old house to purchase this shed. And of course, we've got it insulated. We've got, you can't see now because it's winter, but I got an AC unit here. There's my little space heater on the floor that's on a thermostat and a timer. Right now, because it's been really cold the last couple weeks, I've got the windows covered to keep the heat in and keep these rats nice and happy. We don't keep it super warm in here, but during the winter, but warm enough that they stay warm and happy and keep breeding. So, like I said, I started actually with just these 2 racks over here, and the way I got started is I actually found a guy online through one of the Facebook groups I was a part of. Sorry, camera works shoddy. And he was looking to get out of rats. He had been breeding rodents. He only had like 1 or 2 snakes, but he was breeding rodents and selling them and was looking to get out of it. And I actually worked it out with him to trade him one of my baby ball pythons. It was a blue-eyed leucistic, and I traded it to him for these 2 rack systems and for colonies of rats to get started. So when I started out, I actually didn't have to come out of pocket for the racks or the rats. I just was able to trade an animal that I had produced. So that was the ideal way to go. So as I talk about some of the financial aspects and the money I've saved, I'm going to be talking primarily about ongoing costs. So I'm not going to really address the upfront costs. So obviously, having this shed built and insulated and all that fun stuff, there was a lot of materials and time that went into that, and that was kind of expensive. You saw behind me already, I've got some Freedom Breeder racks here now, which is primarily what I use. These are expensive rack systems, but they are so worth it. Definitely give you the most opportunity to produce in a small space, and they make life a lot easier. They're a lot easier to manage, clean, and all that stuff. They're a lot faster to work with than these older style homemade tubs. Again, nothing wrong with these. These are awesome. They got me started and helped me for sure, but the bigger ones definitely have their advantages. So when I talk about the cost, I'm gonna try and look at what I was spending on rodents based on the size of my collection versus how the collection's grown and the rodent needs have grown, and how the ongoing cost to keep these rats healthy and happy, the bedding, the food, and all that kind of stuff, what the costs are. I have to kind of estimate that because I can't tell you exactly what the cost would have been, because the collection of snakes has been growing consistently since the beginning. So I'll show you some numbers here. I'll talk about some numbers here in a minute, but why don't we talk a little bit about how I do this. I've got, again, there's a mess. I've got a big old stack here of pine bedding. That's what they're on. I also have down here, you'll see this is equine pine pellets. So these are hard pine pellets that I put in the bottom of the tubs that help absorb the odor and the urine and all that kind of stuff. So basically soak up the liquids, and it helps keep the smell down, and it just absorbs the moisture. So those are the two things that go in the tubs. Then in the corner over here, I buy my feed in bulk. So I've got FRM rodent feed. There's a couple of feed stores I can get this from, but one's 45 minutes away from my house. One is an hour away. But the one that's an hour away, I pass by somewhat regularly with my day job, my real job. And so I'll try and work it out if I'm getting close to that location out in Camden, South Carolina. When I am running low, I'll just bulk up or stock up with bulk. I think I bought 25 bags last time, so 1,250 pounds of rodent feed. You can imagine that's a big expense at once, but I can keep them here in the dry storage and have them for months. So those are the basic materials I'll use. I have different size tubs, which you can see here. These are the big boys, the main breeding tubs that I use. I've got another size up here, which I'll explain a little bit about that. These would be equivalent to your 70 series tubs, which is similar to what the snakes are in, the big snakes are in. These ones are the same dimensions. They're just a couple of inches deeper. And then, of course, I've got these concrete mixing tubs. I don't know what the actual size is. There are a couple different sizes at Lowe's, so I just had to find the right one to fit. And then now, my newest rack, I have these small little, I call maternity tubs for the pregnant moms to raise their babies in when they're first born. All of these have a feeding trough, so the food is up, because the thing about rats is if the food's inside, you can see that the food's inside, hey buddy, they'll eat it, and they'll walk on it, and they'll do their business on it, and then they'll still eat it. Obviously, you don't want your rats eating their own mess, so you have these little trays up top so that their food can be separated. Plus, it gives them some exercise and some enrichment for them having to work for their food a little bit rather than just laying on their back, because sometimes they can be lazy. It's kind of funny to watch them. So that's the setup and the tub sizes I use. Now, when I started, when I got moved up from the homemade racks, my first rack was this. It's a Freedom Breeder original, I think it's called a 72180, I think. But if you can kind of see, I'll try and zoom in here a little bit. I've got two different size tubs, the two size tubs that I showed you, and these are good for the adults to breed in. They're a little deeper. These ones are a little shallower. I'm trying to see if I can find some cute. They're up close. They'll probably run. Look at them. Aren't they cute? Aren't they cute little babies? But so these are shallower, so that way the smaller rats, when they're fully weaned, they can go into these tubs and they can still reach up to get to the food and get to the water spouts which in there. All of these have a gravity-fed watering system, so you can't see it on this one because I've got a water line enclosure that covers everything. On this rack, I didn't go with the water line enclosure, so you can see the tubing that goes here, and I actually have two water containers up top, and it comes down. So this one has 8 levels. This one has 7 levels. This one has one system that feeds the whole rack. This one I broke it into 2, so there's 2 different containers that each feed 4 rows, 4 levels of the rack system. Let's talk about money. So I wrote down some numbers. I calculated some numbers for you guys so that I'm not just kind of blowing smoke here or talking off the top of my head. So to put it in perspective, I started breeding, I started preparing to breed, I should say, in 2017, kind of later in the year, November 2017. I bought my first 4 snakes with the intention of breeding them and the intention, obviously, to grow the collection over time. In 2017, I spent less than $300 on rodents because I only had 4 snakes. Now, the following year, I bought a bulk order of frozen rodents at the end of the year. Obviously, it was already the end of the year when I started. So those rodents actually lasted me through a good part of the next year. So probably half of that or less was actual cost for 2017. Now, 2018 was my first full year. I did add a couple more snakes. I think I added 3 more snakes. 2 were already adults, and I got another baby in 2018. And my cost still, with what I had left over from 2017, was just under $300 for that whole year. Now, 2019 came along, and my cost for feeders, again, I was buying all my feeders either live or frozen thawed, primarily frozen thawed. I'm going to find a way to set this down because my arm's getting kind of tired of holding it. So hopefully the light's not blinding you. So I'll move this over here too. In 2019, I spent right at $1,100. $1,099 is what I spent on feeders that year. Now, that year I produced my first clutch. I had 1 clutch from 2 females that I paired up that year. I think it was 8 babies. And so, again, a little bit more to feed, but obviously you can see there was, a significant jump from $300, let's say $450 to be fair with what I had already purchased, to $1,100. In 2020, again, the collection was growing slowly. Again, that year I only actually had 1 clutch of babies, but we jumped to $1,636 in rodent costs. Now, during this time, of course, COVID had hit. Prices were starting to go up on a lot of things, and feeders were no exception to that. I also, you have a limited number of sources, and it was a little bit harder during those days. But so you can see I jumped up about 50% in cost. 2021 is when things kind of really started to grow for us. We added more snakes. We had 8 clutches that year. I think it was somewhere around 40 babies that we ended up producing that year. And so there was a lot more. But that year is when I really realized I have to start breeding my own rats, because prior to that season, I had found a rat breeder that I thought was going to be reliable. I had gotten some bulk orders from them, and I told them, look, I've got breeding season coming up. I'm expecting some clutches. I'm going to need 40 to 50, rat pups every week. And they were like, cool, we got you, no problem. We're good. Well, when the breeding season came along and babies started hatching, and I was getting to where I needed these rats, I reached out and the people went radio silent on me. I think something had happened, and I don't know exactly, but suddenly the source that I was counting on was no longer available. And so I was feeding actually some babies frozen thawed rats their first meal. Thankfully, a lot of them took it. Some of them took a little more work, but I was actually having to depend on frozen thawed because I had lost the source that I had for small feeders for those babies. In addition to that, of course, it's expensive, especially if you're buying live medium rats for my breeding females. It just gets expensive. So 2021, I spent just over $2,500 on feeders that year. At the end of 2021 is when I made that trade, and I got into the rat breeding business for myself and started producing my own rats. Of course, I tried to hold back as much as I could so that I could begin to fill and breed from this big rack once I got it and got it assembled and put together. So the last full year that I was, and it wasn't even the full year because I had a little bit at the end of the year that I was feeding my own production, was just over $2,500. So you can see this is growing pretty quick, right? This is a lot of money. In 2022, rat production really picked up, and I only spent $575 on feeders above and beyond what I could produce. So that was pretty awesome. And we had a large number of, our biggest number of clutches to date. We had just over 60 babies, I think. So there was a lot of feeding going on. Some take a break during breeding season, and then you got other little mouths to feed. And despite that, with what I was able to produce, I spent $575 on rodents in 2022, and my collection definitely increased in size as I was adding more snakes from other breeders, as well as holding back some that I produced, and of course feeding babies until I could sell them. Sales were a little bit better during that point in time because the government had been handing out COVID relief money, and so things sold a little quicker back then in some cases. Now, in 2023, I spent $932 on feeders. The majority of that came at the end of the year because I had a lot of babies and I was spending money to buy small frozen thawed feeders so that I could keep them, because the reality was my production in the rat shed was not keeping up with what I needed to feed all my animals. And so the easiest way to fix that was to buy bulk frozen orders of rats to keep in the freezer so I could feed the babies. Couple reasons for that. One, babies switch a lot easier. Typically, most babies, if you do it right, will switch to frozen thawed fairly easily. And a lot of folks that are buying babies want them to be on frozen thawed anyway. So it just made sense, and it's a lot easier to do that than to try and feed the adults. So I started feeding frozen thawed at the end of the year. And so I had a couple of big bulk orders that drove that number up to $932. But I still have a couple months worth of frozen feeders in the freezer for the beginning of this year. So that $932 isn't really a true cost. That's what I spent in the calendar year, but that's actually getting me through some of this year so that I can raise up more babies to feed my adults. And hopefully as we get it going, I just had, I think it was 60 females that I've been raising up for several months that are now starting to breed. So I expect my production to really, really kick up here very soon so that I'll be able to cover all the snakes I have and then some. Hopefully we'll have some extras that we can stock the freezer ourselves in case we have a lull in production. That happens sometimes, where you kind of have peaks and valleys in your production and the collection. But then I'll also hopefully have enough leftovers. I'll be able to help supply some other keepers in the community who are looking for quality, healthy, live rodents, or even frozen thawed. Now, as we talk about cost, the thing that really has to come into play here is there's a lot of expenses that went into being able to produce these. So obviously I've got some high-end racks here. Those were not cheap. I've got the shed here. That was not cheap. Watering system, various things that I've invested in. I'm not really going to factor those in to my cost analysis, because what I'm trying to do is compare, if I had been buying frozen rodents, how much more would have cost than what I'm spending on the weekly and monthly maintenance to keep and maintain these rodents. Okay, so I want to put that caveat out here, but let's look at the numbers. So again, I said in 2022, I spent $575. I spent a total of $1,150 on routine rodent supplies. So feed, cleaning supplies, trash bags, etc. Those things that are set weekly costs, things that I have to provide for the animals to breed them, keep them healthy, and house them. Those I spent $1,150 in 2022. So that brings me up to a total of $1,725 routine expense, not including the big ticket items. So that's actually $800 less than I spent on feeders in 2021. which $800 off the bat seems okay. But here's the reality is my collection grew a lot in 2022, and I produced 30% or so, right around 30% more babies in 2022 than I did in 2021. So if I tried to do a rough estimate, a very conservative estimate I feel like was $4,000. So I would have spent at least bare minimum $4,000 on feeders in 2022 had I not been producing my own. So if I use that number, which honestly I think is probably much closer to $5,000, but if I use that $4,000 figure, that still puts me saving $2,300 in that year over buying all my rodents. Okay. Now let's look at 2023, because my collection definitely jumped up. My collection's more than doubled in size from 2021 to 2023. Okay. I spent $932 on feeders, and I spent $2,156 on bedding, food, routine supplies needed to keep and breed the rats. So that puts me at just over $3,000 total cost. However, I went and did like some quick math, not anything real scientific, but I estimated if I had bought all small and rat pups. Those are the only two sizes I calculated in my calculations based on the animals that I have and the length of time that I've had to feed those animals. I estimate that if I've been buying them all with the price increase of rodents, probably somewhere around $9,000 is what I would have spent last year. Again, that's not factoring buying any mediums. As you know, mediums cost a lot more, particularly if you're buying them live. If they're frozen thawed, they're typically not that huge of a difference. But the reality is I usually feed some mediums to my big females throughout parts of the year. So $9,000 still is a relatively conservative estimate, which is crazy. The cost is going up, and I've got a lot more animals. In fact, right now I have right around 100 ball pythons in the snake shed between the babies and the adults and the grow outs that I'm raising and holding back. So that's a lot of animals to feed. $9,000 that's a lot. But when I only spent $3,000 on the feeders that I did have to buy and the supplies, you can see right there, I saved about $5,000 to $6,000 just last year alone. So add that into the $2,300 from the year before and factor that those are conservative numbers. I've got some savings at the end of 2021 and a little bit so far this year. So that puts me right around about $10,000 in savings over whether if I had bought every rodent myself, frozen thawed or live. Live would even cost more. So it's kind of a big deal, right? That $10,000 that I've saved in the last 2 years easily paid for the 2 rack systems that I have here that I've built. It paid for a good portion of the shed. Over the next couple years, I will have totally made up all the costs that I invested. And now hear me, you can do this and you can do it a lot cheaper than I did. You don't have to invest in these high dollar racks to produce a lot of rats, right? There's a way that you can do it lower, but like I said, I had some equity from selling my house, so I decided to go ahead and jump in, and it has paid off tremendously. So if you are thinking about growing a big collection and you're thinking about breeding rats, I will say it absolutely will save you money. You know, not in the immediate, like when you're getting started, you have to invest in it like anything else. But once you get rolling, it will most definitely save you money. And I'm going to produce far greater number of rats this year than I did last year because I added, in September, I added this second rack, the grow out rack. And as I've caught up, I just raised up a bunch of females, like 60 more breeding females that are now getting ready to breed. So when those come in, my numbers should go up significantly, and you know, it'll go from there. But just to kind of quickly, since I know this is getting long, this tub, these bigger tubs, I have my breeders in, and we'll open this up and look. Here's some of the new moms and one big female. So in these big tubs, I'll put 6 females. Hey, darling. I'll put 6 females with 1 male. Now rats, they'll go into heat about every 4 to 5 days. And so those males will breed them constantly. Now they don't all get pregnant, obviously, that you know how it works. But what I try to do is I'll put them in there. I'll leave the male in there for 18 days. I figure that gives him enough time for 4 heat cycles, so he'll breed every female multiple times, and then I'll take him out. The gestation period for a rat is somewhere between like 22 to 26 days. So 3 to 4 weeks from the time she's pregnant, she'll give us babies. Once these girls get pregnant and I see that they're pregnant, I'll move them over to the maternity tubs. So these are just smaller tubs. See if we can find some fresh babies here. Oh, hey there, mama. Look at this. So we've got some pinkies. I put her in yesterday and cleaned all these. So these are day old. If I can get it, I don't want to drop you. That's a day old rat, Pinky, and it's a good mama. She's carrying them around to keep them safe and get them away from me because she doesn't know. I'm gonna see if I can show you. If you can see that white lump there in the belly, that's actually milk. The mom was just feeding them. Hey, mama, you did a good job. You did a good job. I know, you're like, don't mess with me. So really cool. Here's some babies that are a little bit older, and aren't they precious? I have to admit, I'm not crazy about the rats because they're a lot of work, but some of these jokers, don't run out. They're just so cute. A little dot on his head. He got almost a heart shape. But so that's the deal. Once they get pregnant, they go in here until they have their litter. So fun fact, if you didn't know, a litter of rats is also referred to as kittens. I use that terminology because it really bothers my kids for some reason. So of course I'm going to keep saying it because it's fun to mess with them, right? It's part of a dad's job. So once they have their litter, they'll stay in here for several weeks, 3 or 4 weeks typically, until the rats are fully weaned. And once they're fully weaned, we'll move them over to one of these. Look at that mountain of fur. They always like to cuddle with each other. So we'll move over to these smaller tubs. Hey, babies. How you doing, buddy? Don't go anywhere. They are cute when they're little. But anyway, so once they get weaned, you got to make sure that nobody stuck their head out when you close it. Once they're fully weaned, then we put them into this tub where they can start to reach the water and the food for themselves. And that way we can put a lot of weaned rats in one of these tubs as they grow out until they make it to smalls. And smalls is, for me personally, that's the size I like to feed all of my adults. Sometimes they'll get a little bit bigger. We'll feed those to the bigger females. But in a nutshell, that's it. I know this is really long. Hopefully you stuck in here till the end. But I'm not kidding. I'm not exaggerating to say in the last 2 to 3 years, I have saved $10,000 or more breeding my own rats. It is a lot of work. If I'm totally honest, I'd rather not breed the rats. I wish I didn't have to do this, to be honest, because it's actually a lot of work, especially for a veteran with a bad back. But it's probably good to keep me moving. But it's absolutely worth it. I could not keep my reptile collection the way that I do if I were not breeding my own rats. So hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions, put them down in the comments. I'll be happy to try and answer. I don't consider myself a rat expert, but as you can see, I must be doing something right. So thanks everybody. You have a great weekend. And I know that this isn't really a reptile video per se, but I do want to remind you to share the love of reptiles with anybody you can. Y'all are awesome. See you on the next one.